Okay.
Oh, so we just started the presentation. I think we still have a couple minutes to go. My name's John from CUAHSI. I'm gonna actually stop the recording real quick here because we have a couple more minutes. So hi everybody, I'm John from CUAHSI. I'm jumping on this call real quick because some of our other staff are having a little trouble connecting, but thank you for joining us this afternoon, and I'm excited to hand it over to our host for today's webinar.
Hi everyone, this is Anna Hermes. I'm a member of the AGU Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee, and we have several other committee members online today as well. So welcome to our first cyber seminar of our fall series, Beyond Grad School, A Guide to Landing Your Dream Job. And today we're going to be talking specifically about the pre-application phase. So before we jump into things, just a little bit about H3S, or the Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee. We are a group of graduate students from universities around the US and world, and our job is to pretty much provide student members and the broader student and early career hydrology community with opportunities for professional development and networking. And we do that through sort of online activities, which we've been delighted to be able to partner with CUAHSI for a variety of cyber seminars, as well as a lot of events at the AGU fall meeting every year. So look us up on Twitter. Our handle is on the bottom of your screen, as is the one for CUAHSI, and follow what we're up to. So the seminar today overall is going to be organized in that will briefly introduce the panelists that have graciously joined us today to share their expertise. They'll introduce themselves, and we've asked them to sort of answer a few questions about the pre-application phase in that introduction. We have a first set of questions for the panelists to go through, and then we're hoping to have a lot of time for audience Q&A. So please use the question or chat box to submit questions that we can discuss in the latter half of the seminar. So today we have 5 panelists, and the first is Dr. Walter McDonald, who's an assistant professor in civil construction and environmental engineering at Marquette University. He is an expert in stormwater management with emphasis on coupling field measurements, modeling, and management practices. We also have Dr. Adam Wlostowski, who's a water resources scientist at Lynkey Technologies, which is a small private firm specializing in information technology and services. And Adam is an expert in hydrologic modeling. We have Joanna Blaszczak, an assistant professor in the Natural Resources and Environmental Science Department at the University of Nevada, Reno, who's an expert in freshwater biogeochemistry, ecosystem ecology, and environmental toxicology. We also have Dr. Ariel Atkinson, a postdoc at the Southern Nevada Water Authority with expertise in drinking water treatment, and Dr. Jeffrey McDonnell, the Associate Director of the Global Institute for Water Security and professor in the School of Environment and Sustainability at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. McDonald is a leader in our field and a former president of the AGU Hydrology section, and we are really excited to have all of you with us today. So with that, I'll turn it over to each of you to sort of introduce yourself, and we asked you to consider if there were any parts of the pre-application phase that caught you off guard or that you hadn't been prepared for during your job hunt and transition. So maybe we can start with Dr. Blaszczak.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. So when I thought about this question of what caught me off guard about the job application process, I think the first thing that came to mind was really just the amount of time that it takes. And so writing your first draft of your job document, so of course I'm speaking from an academic job search perspective. Transportation in the background and the sound. Okay. All right. So how long it took to write those documents and get feedback. And I found it to be really important to be clear with my postdoc advisor that I was on the job market and really to talk with him about how do I balance the amount of time that I'm trying to look forward and try to find opportunities looking ahead versus balancing the amount of time that I was spending on my actual postdoc responsibilities. Yep.
Adam, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, yeah. That seems like a pretty good place to pick up. I think I'll address one of the shortcomings that I recognized during my pre-application phase in retrospect, considering how much time it takes to put into creating applications, as Joanna mentioned. I sort of regret having blinders on, if you will, about all the career potential for people coming out of a PhD. So it's very easy to get single focused or single track mind on just an academic future. And that's, I think, particular to the institution you're at. Certainly the mentors and advisors that I've had in the past have all, successfully gone down the track of getting an academic job. And it wasn't until I was far enough down that pathway and in the process of interviewing places that I realized that maybe this isn't necessarily what I would want and what would be best for my future. And so if I could go back, I would have casted a much wider networking net from the beginning, because when you're considering jobs in private industry, the little things go a very long way, and that's developing personal connections, which prove to be absolutely everything. And so having coffee with people, having beer with people, listening to people, and understanding what they do and developing a personal connection is really what's going to get you a job if you're considering the private sector. And then those skills become very important in actually generating business once you're in those jobs, because again, it's personal connections that lead to lines of business. At least that's what I've found so far. So to summarize, just reverting, casting a wider net in networking, and having a really open mind. While you think you might really want to be an assistant professor, maybe there's government positions and private sector positions that deserve to get a little more of your attention during the process. So that's it.
Ariel, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I think I have a bit of a different perspective coming from sort of a governmental organization. But prior to that, I was in academia, and I did try to go down that path. So I have gone through the process of applying to academic jobs, consulting jobs, and, eventually now where I am in the public sector. And so, I'm happy to give whatever advice I can on each of those, and they are all the application processes are all very different. As for the academic process, obviously I'm not in an academic position now, but one of the things that I wish I would have done is actually started to prepare my application process a lot earlier than I did. So prior to my position here at Southern Nevada Water Authority, I was a postdoc at Arizona State University with Paul Westerhoff. And, obviously I was in a PhD prior to that. And so I think one thing that would have really made the difference is if I started my application process while I was still a PhD student for the academic market. Because as the previous panelists have said, it does take quite a bit of time to prepare an application. It is very stressful. So, having that time and buffer before the, application cycle begins really, would have been better. And I think applying a year ahead of where I was really ready would have also given me more experience and better prepared me for when I really wanted to, move forward. As for the consulting and public sector, just as with academics too, as Adam said, really like networking and connecting and being open to experiences really, I think is invaluable. And, don't, as Adam was saying, like limit yourself. I am in a research and development department at a public water utility where I get to help make decisions that impact 9 million people. And it's really exciting research. And, I think it's just as satisfying as it could be in academia, if not more. I mean, for me personally. So I think if you sort of think about what you want out of a job rather than just focusing on, I want this particular position, I think that would be, for me, that was a good approach. And I did end up in a permanent position here where I'm just, I feel really great about it and I really enjoy it. And so, yeah, that's my advice.
Thank you so much. How about Dr. McDonough?
Yeah, first I want to say, Anna, thank you for organizing this, you and your team. These are great events. I guess my answer to this question is a little complicated because my first job I applied to for a faculty post was before the internet was invented. So perhaps my experiences then don't translate to 2019, but in the last 30 years, I guess I've had, 70, 75 grad students and postdocs who've gone on to different careers. And perhaps to get to this question, I think a lot of it is knowing the department that you're applying to. And that's where the research before you craft your letter and teaching package really comes in. And to know that each application is really kind of a mini research project unto itself. And because now applications to faculty positions, which maybe I'll speak to exclusively here, net so many applicants, maybe 100, it's really that careful consideration of your link to the department, what added value you bring to the group, naming specific people, projects, initiatives, elements of the department that you dock to and what sets you apart from other candidates, because you're wanting the reader who's going to look very, very quickly at this letter as they go through the 100 applicants, let's say, to see your potential and to kind of paint a picture in that letter that lets them know that you're worth considering for a phone interview or what have you. The last thing I'll say is that maybe talk to other successful folks that have got recently a faculty position. I know former CUAHSI employee John Duncan, who's now an assistant professor at Penn State University. He was very generous with sharing some of his application materials to other young PhD students and postdocs who are applying to faculty positions, and seeing what a successful document looks like can be enormously helpful. Even sitting on search committees within your department as a student rep, boy, that really opens your eyes to what makes for a successful cover letter. So these are some of the things I guess I've learned in the fullness of time, just mentoring my own students and sitting on numerous hiring committees that maybe I'd share. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And last but not least, Dr. McDonald.
All right, thank you. So as I mentioned, I'm a fourth year assistant professor at Marquette University. And before that, I got my PhD at Virginia Tech. And so my experiences in the application process and interviewing are coming out as a PhD student. And the question that they had posed to us was if there's anything that caught you off guard. And so as I was reflecting back on my experience, I think the times in the interview process and in preparing for it that I was caught off guard was probably in the phone interview for questions that I might not have been prepared for. So you can kind of think about that phone interview. You've got an opportunity to answer basically 10 questions, and they can ask you anything. And so for the ones that went really well were the ones that I prepared for. I knew, as Jeffrey had said, what that department was, where I fit within it, what the different maybe institutions were there, or synergies that might interact with my research, and how I could fit, and why that was not just a good university, but a good place geographically, all the above. And on the ones where I really stumbled were when I didn't do my homework as well, to have really good, clear answers on why I want to be there, why my research fits in that area of the country and in that university and in that department, what courses I'm going to teach, what courses I'm going to develop, and why. And so just being prepared for each university that you're applying to, both in your teaching statement, research statement, your cover letter, but then also really doing your homework before you do that phone interview, I think was key for me, and that's in one of the places where I did get caught off guard.
Thank you guys all for that super helpful advice. I think that's one thing as a student that we all kind of struggle with is sort of what are the unknown unknowns as we look for and begin the job hunt. So that's all really helpful as we start to think about how to organize our materials and network, and really make sure that we're prepared for those interviews, etc. So yeah, thanks so much. So we have a few questions that we can get started with that H3S came up with, and we've asked the panelists to consider. And there's sort of a series of questions. And the first is, we all are aware that there are job or postdoc or any of these jobs have particular application cycles. And so are there certain times of the year that are important to target for looking for particular types of positions, both academic and non-academic? And so kind of getting at that timeline of, and I heard someone mention it could take up to a year. So when is a good time to be kind of looking out for job ads? And then following from that, when is an appropriate time to reach out to potential collaborators or advisors or employers? And then finally, we were curious about whether there are some really useful online resources or other resources for finding jobs related to the hydrology field. Basically, in my very novice experience, I just Google things. So if there are other places that are useful resources, that would be super great to know. So I think we can just sort of go down the line in the order that your photos appear on that intro slide, if that sounds okay to you guys.
Okay, great. So I guess I'm up. All right, so I'm going to try to keep this brief because I could probably talk for a long time. And also, I just want to say again that I'm only speaking for academic positions. So for the first question of what times of year are important to target for academic positions, now until probably late next spring, there are positions coming out. I know my department will be advertising for another position later in the fall, and kind of linked to that, there are some great online resources. So I know this is a quasi-seminar, but for people who are more on the biogeochemistry ecology side of water science, there's this website called ecoevojobs.net, and it's this group-sourced job posting board where everyone posts jobs, writes in when is the deadline, and then people actually write in whether they got an interview, whether they got an on-campus interview. And I found that to be incredibly helpful for just kind of, if I applied to a job and I hadn't heard in a month, I could look on there and kind of see, okay, I need to let go of this job, or, oh, maybe they're still reviewing applications. So that is incredibly helpful. There's also a mailing listserv called the Earth Science Women's Job Board. And before I keep moving on this, after I got a job, I put together just like a really short resource thing on my website, and I can send that link out as well. But it has a link to that mailing list, and they send out lots of great jobs. And then finally, there's this website called Josh's Water Jobs. And so that has everything from academic to other non-academic positions, and including deadlines and links to those jobs. So those are all really great resources. And finally, when is an appropriate time to reach out to collaborators? So I think it's never too early to reach out to people in your network to ask for examples of their job documents, or to get advice or insight as to maybe what jobs are coming up. However, for academic positions, I would be careful reaching out to a department besides the listed search committee chair, because obviously there's sort of reasons regarding conflict of interest that people may be a little bit more hesitant to talk to you during the actual search process, so that they don't violate any sort of rules. But that doesn't mean that you can't, if you see a job and you're interested, but you do want some more information, I think it's great to reach out to the search committee chair. All right, so I think that's everything.
All right, I'll follow up. This is Adam. Unlike the academic job search, finding a job in private industry, there's not much seasonality to it. It's always a full court press. In the academic job search, there's this cyclical, you see a cycle of announcements come out in the fall and the spring, and then that turns into phone interview season, which turns into on-campus interview season. And so there's this periodicity to it. Whereas if you're finding a job in the private sector, specifically speaking about consulting firms, which is where a lot of people coming out of a water resources technical background will fall into, it's whether a company has a project available to hire someone on or not, or maybe you have a project that you can somehow bring business into a company. But basically, there's either a position available or there's not. And so if there's 15 different companies that do the type of work that you're interested in a particular region, chances are that at any given time, one of them has an opportunity. And so what that leaves you with as your best tool is your network. Your network, I promise you, just reaches far, far beyond where you think it reaches. If you've been in a town and you've done your master's or your PhD education there, and you've had your friends graduate and move on, some fraction of those people have probably moved in to the industry that you're interested in the region you're interested in. And if not them, then certainly you know people who know people that are in the industry that you're interested in. And so if you work that network, you can certainly put yourself in the proximity of people that are have some influence over the hiring process at whatever company that you might be interested in the places you want to be interested in. And so always working that network, always taking time to have coffee with people, to have beers with people, just to reinforce that, hey, you know, I'm on the job market. Do you know who I am? Because the next phase is actually putting in an application. So let's say there's a job that's actually posted and you put in your resume and cover letter. If there's not a personal connection there, the likelihood that you will get called back is unfortunately really minimal. And that's a big deviation from what it's like applying to an academic job position, because you really can stand on your merits when you're applying for a tenure track faculty position, whereas it's all about who you know, in a way more so than what you know when you're looking for private industry positions. As a small anecdote, when I was interviewing at the company I'm with now, they sort of put my CV to the side and said, hey, I'm sure you know a lot of stuff, but who do you know? Like, what is your network, and what are you going to bring to this company in terms of your network? So to wrap all that up, it's always game on when you're looking to find a job in private industry. And your best tool, your absolute best tool is your network. So put together a good cover letter, put together a good CV. You're probably extremely smart and intelligent, but emphasize who you know and work that network, and it should do good things. Thanks.
All right, this is Ariel. So no one's mentioned postdocs yet, but I think for finding postdocs, if you're looking for a postdoc before going on to a faculty position or otherwise, the application process is much closer to when the positions start, and they sort of come out as funding notices come out. So look for that if you know what, major grants are being offered and when those funding notices come out. So start looking for postdocs around that time. There are a lot of really great online resources for finding jobs in the public sector and consulting firms. I think Josh's water blogs, as Joanna mentioned, is a really great one. Using people that you know, as Adam said, hopefully they're sending you, like, tell the people that you know, I am looking for a job and this is the type of job that I'm looking for. And you'll start getting, hey, this opening is gonna, there's gonna be an opening here before the, postings even start coming out. So yes, the network is also really important for finding, private sector jobs and consulting jobs. I would say figure out what companies or what utilities you would really want to work with, and check their websites weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, depending on, how close you are to being able to graduate. And then reach out to people that you know at those companies, or, reach out to people that you know, hey, I don't know someone here. Do you know someone here? Can you connect me? It really is, I think, in academics, in consulting, in private industry, in the public, sectors, it really is all about who you know and really utilizing those resources. At a place like SNWA, there is a bit more of a neutral process. It does, everyone's application is thoroughly considered. They are ranked. They go through, an HR that narrows it down. Then it goes to the, manager that you're going to be working under. And, they are very careful to give every application a chance. So I think at least in the public sector, don't hesitate. If you don't know someone, it's fine. Just, put in your application. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. As far as public sector, if you want to do R&D, there's really not that many utilities that do research and development. So there's Southern Nevada Water Authority, there's Metropolitan Water District, there's Hampton Roads Sanitation District. So if you're wanting to work at a utility, those are great places to look. As far as consulting firms, I would say, you know, Carollo, Black & Veatch, Stantec, CH2M Hill, Hazen and Sawyer, Brown and Caldwell. Those are all good websites that you should be checking regularly. And I would say even before you're ready to apply, you know, a year before you're ready to apply, just, you know, get on listservs and look at the job descriptions, and, you know, it'll help you think about what sort of job you want and how you can, you know, in the next year or 2 years, how can you tailor yourself to match those sorts of job descriptions and what they're looking for. So I think that's all I have to say for now.
Okay, Jeff here. These are really excellent points. I'm not sure how much I can add. As I go through the 3 points, maybe just expanding on the postdoc discussion. I've had 30 postdocs. I'm not sure I've ever advertised for one. So I would say perhaps a little known secret is that most postdocs, I think, are never advertised. It's word of mouth. And this is where these comments about networks are so crucial. Someone said, I read recently, it's networking or not working, just to put a fine point on it. And I think, you know, it's networks that happen and develop through your activities at AGU in this this section that our group that Anna and her colleagues are organizing. That's great. There's an EGU equivalent, the Young Hydrology Society. They're very active. That's also a good source of information on jobs or one postdocs that are in fact advertised. But it's going to workshops. It's developing meaningful discussions and connections with people in the field. It's going and visiting labs, you know, at another university in your state, elsewhere in the country, internationally, and it's about collaboration and getting to know people and having other people extol your virtues. Certainly for the postdocs, faculty are always looking out for hot prospects for a postdoc. I'm thinking that every time I listen to an AGU talk or go to a poster session, and I'm sure many faculty are as well. So it's knowing that you're being interviewed whether you know it or not, in terms of people looking for, you know, postdocs that aren't advertised. When to reach out, I guess, on the postdoc side, I think that's kind of happening organically through your PhD experience, and hopefully you're in a situation where you can meet, interact. You'll have speakers coming to campus. Any way that you can begin to talk to them, to learn about them, ask questions about their labs. I think a lot of the success I see in early career is linked to that level of engagement before you even finish the PhD. In terms of places to learn about jobs, in my area, ISOBioGeochem, it's a mouthful, ISOBioGeochem is a listserv, and there's a lot of job-related information there. Granted, it's in a particular slice of the field. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
All right, so this is Walter, and I'll just talk briefly maybe about some of the resources that I leaned on in trying to develop an application and things like that. So I think in terms of, you know, the academic interview and job application process, it can be a little bit like daunting. You don't really know like what's supposed to go in a teaching statement, research statement, my cover letter, etc. And so I'm naturally a shy person. I don't like asking people for things, but now's not the time to be shy when you're applying. And so what I did was I asked, you know, all the assistant professors in my department if they would meet with me to help me to understand that process a little bit better. I reached out to people that I knew that were PhD students that formerly had jobs to see, you know, what kind of advice they had for the application process. Even my advisor put me in contact with some of his old and former students. And so I found talking with other people and looking within my network to develop those application materials was super helpful. And then, like you all, a lot of what I did was Google and try to find application advice online. And so there's certainly lots of stuff out there. But yeah, I'll just kind of echo what everybody said, and using your network and using it to help you to develop those application materials is super helpful.
Wow, thank you all. That's like extremely helpful information. I sent a few of the links that Joanna mentioned in the questions box, and we will be compiling some of those other resources as well, and we can post them on our Twitter. So I think there were a couple questions from the audience kind of following directly from those first questions. So one question I think is really helpful is how do you emphasize who you know in a tactful manner? So you all mentioned that networking is really important. How do you do that in a way that's not just sort of name dropping or doesn't feel that way? Or is name dropping totally fine and we should all be doing it more?
This is Adam here. I'll answer that from my perspective on it. You can do it in a tactful manner, that is name drop, by saying, "Hey, do you know person so and so? You know, I think that's a mutual friend of ours or something." You know, explain how exactly you know them, and maybe explain how that person led you to develop this relationship that you're trying to form with the person you're speaking with, whether that's a hiring manager or a senior person at a company you're looking to develop some interest in. And at least in the private sector, don't be shy about name dropping. You know, use that to your advantage. I've even heard people go so far as to lead off their cover letters with listing who they know as a way of getting their foot in the door at a particular company. Now, switching views over to the academic side of things, one thing that Jeffrey mentioned was it's really important in a cover letter or a statement of research to name drop who you will work with in a particular academic department, to be very explicit about how you will interact and collaborate with folks. And I think there are lots of philosophies out there. Some people say don't name drop, some people say do. But I err on the side of don't be shy. Get out there, be really expressive about who it is you know, what the extent of your network is, and then that'll lead to conversations. It'll be a nice wedge to develop a relationship and have more fruitful conversations with whomever it is you're trying to build a relationship with.
Yeah, Jeff here, just quickly building on that. I think for an academic job application, it's more about maybe who you're working with. So perhaps you spent a few months with Professor Siva Palin at Illinois, or you've just written a proposal with Bill Dietrich's group at UC Berkeley. They're looking, I think some meaningful connections like that are really worth mentioning. People in their minds are looking for a leader. They're looking for a leader in the department. They're looking for a leader at the university level. They're looking for a leader nationally. And I think evidence of going above and beyond publishing 3 papers and being on the job market is kind of what you're trying to convey in your letter. You want to have a kind of a level of energy that sets you apart, and these kind of collaborations, even if it's a side project in your PhD, that can really set you apart. Now, one easy way to develop or grow your network is to maybe reach out to former lab members. Your professor, he or she will have likely former grad students or possibly postdocs, And that is a ready-made network, and you can use your advisor to help connect you to some of them. This is what we do in my lab, and we have annual meetings at AGU where we all come together, and I try to get the generations talking to each other. Why? Because for a new graduate, that is a ready-made network that they can capitalize on, and you might think of that as a kind of a less daunting way, perhaps, to maybe think about this network development and what you could speak to in a meaningful way in an application for an academic position. And I think there is a bit of difference between that and what we just heard for perhaps a consulting job. Thanks.
Does anyone have anything to add to those comments?
This is Walter. I'll just add one more thing. When it comes in terms of like, all right, how to name drop it, it's not even necessarily, people's names that you might want to name drop in your like cover letter or research statement, but also maybe if you're like serving on committees at maybe conferences or something like that, or even like the broader impacts of your work. So if you've done some research and you've published it, but is there ways that you've done some outreach with your research to within the community and things like that, but looking for ways to kind of like drop in parts of what you've been doing as a PhD student or a postdoc that show that you are a leader and that you're doing things like Jeffrey said, that is above and beyond just publishing those 3 publications. I think is a good idea.
This is Ariel. I'll add one more thing. I understand like this question, you want to balance like, you don't want to come off as, there's no other way to say it, but cocky, right? But I think, totally in a written application, putting down names and thinking about why am I putting down this name? What is the purpose? How can this demonstrate, something like leadership, potential for collaboration. I think emphasizing why you're name dropping along with the name drop is important. I think in the written application, it's don't be humble. When it comes to maybe a phone interview or an in-person interview, I would, again, think about if you're going to name drop, why am I name dropping? I have known people who have gotten hurt by coming off as cocky, and name dropping too much was a part of that. But as long as you're being conscious and you're saying these names for a reason, I think it's totally fine. And, as long as it demonstrates some quality or, ability, totally good.
Thanks, I think that's really helpful. We have a couple questions coming in also about networking, so I think we'll keep on that topic for now. So one question is, after attending workshops, short courses, and other meetings, and you meet people who can one day offer you a job, how do you keep in touch with them? How do you keep them in your network? I've attended several short courses, and I'm never sure how to keep in touch with the people I meet without seeming too annoying. I definitely have encountered that question a lot. Maybe you have a super great interaction at a poster session. How do you keep that conversation going? I usually follow up with like one email, but how much do you pester people?
Jeff here, very quickly, one thought, I guess you could share with them a paper you've published if it's relevant to their work, and with just a line of following up our conversation. Here's a paper mine just came out in water resources research that could be relevant to your work. Or maybe, hey, I just read your paper in Hess, and here's this one that I just put out, and it seems like we're thinking along similar lines. All the best. That could be one. I'm struggling to think of too many ways to maintain that, but that's just one quick thought.
Yeah, and I think just a quick follow-up email is a great strategy because that just sort of reinforces your conversation and the connection you made. But also, not to be the typical millennial, but Twitter is kind of almost its own networking community. So I try to follow people that I'm interested in networking with, and let's say their paper comes out, I'll read it and retweet it, either with a comment or just retweeting it and sharing their work. So that's one way to sort of, I believe, build community in a sort of low commitment way.
This is Ariel. Building on what Joanna said with the using Twitter, I agree, Twitter is great. One more thing is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is pretty big in, I would say, the public sector and in consulting firms as a way to follow up from a conference or a workshop. And, you know, I have reached out months later, looked at the contact information or sent a LinkedIn message, you know, try to use these people as resources or share like, hey, I came across this today and I thought of, you know, this conversation that we had.
Adam here. Just want to jump in and say that the informational interview is another tool in your toolkit. If you meet someone in your region that works at a company that you find interesting and you meet them only briefly at some sort of conference or event, maybe you can follow up and say, hey, so-and-so, I really like what you do. I really like what your company is up to. I want to learn more about it. Can I carve out time for an informational interview where you can ask them questions about what the company does, what their lines of business are, and then use that as an excuse to suss out if they're hiring or not. And the odds are that you'll probably end up expanding your network because they might say, oh, talk with so-and-so, or I'm going to bring so-and-so along to a meeting. So that might not work very well if it's like someone across the country. Say you meet someone at AGU and then they go to California and you go to Denver, Colorado, and you know it's hard to make an informational interview happen in that capacity. But if it's local and regional and you can drive someone somewhere for a day and have a conversation, take advantage of it. It's sort of a freebie way of interjecting yourself into their presence and increasing your proximity.
Ariel again, I just want to follow up on Adam. That was a really great resource for me as well. Informational interviews are great. And I actually did a number of them over Zoom and GoToWebinar, and I learned so much from them. I would really say take advantage of that. You don't have to know someone really well to ask for an informational interview. Everyone's flattered, like, hey, you want to hear more about what I do and, you know, what I like about my job, what I don't like about my job. Yes, I think that's great. Thanks, Adam.
So I think we have a couple questions coming in that maybe, Adam, you could briefly follow up with. One question about what to message people in LinkedIn. You know, say you see someone that works for a firm you're interested in, or someone that has the job that you want. What's a good icebreaker to sort of reach out to that person? And then similarly, industry people seems, I don't know, maybe just from within academia, it's a little more difficult to figure out who to contact within a firm as, you know, for that informational interview or something like that. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, LinkedIn is a very good tool for this. So one trend that I've noticed, especially with very large companies in the consulting world, is that they're not very transparent with their web presence. So let's say you want to go work for a huge global consulting firm like McKinsey or BCG. You will go on their website and it's hard to find a list of consultants that work on the project that you want to work on. And then it's even harder to find their email address or their phone number. So it's like, man, how do I reach these people? This is where LinkedIn is a good tool. You can, I believe that one of the privileges you have as a user of LinkedIn is like people in your alumni network, or certainly people in your network, or if you have like a secondhand connection to that network, you can reach out and request to be linked to them, and you can send a brief message. My wife actually had a lot of success on this front of setting up informational interviews with people at companies that she had no contact with before with anything but LinkedIn, by reaching out and saying, hey, you also went to Penn State University. Can I sit down with you and have coffee, or at least get on the phone with you for a half hour and pick your brain? And again, as Ariel said, people like to talk about themselves. And so if you use that as an excuse to get someone talking, and you allow them to be a bit flattered, that's going to break the ice, and it's going to help you. So back to the core of the question, a simple LinkedIn message that says either, I see you and I know this person, and this is why I'm contacting you, or I see that you're also an alumnus of the university I was at, and this is why I'm contacting you. And you only have so many words, so be concise. Let them know that you're interested in the company they work for, and it should follow from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. That's super helpful. I do apologize, everyone. A generator has started up behind me, so I apologize for the background noise. We did have a couple questions. I think this is really important to be able to touch on before we wrap up in the next 5-ish minutes. We have a couple of questions specifically for international students. Many jobs have visa requirements or are citizen requirements. Do you have any advice about what steps to take for a job in industry, being an international student, or any other sort of tips for that situation?
This is Ariel here. So in the public sector, at least with small utilities, even, larger utilities, unfortunately, they typically do not sponsor visas. So you may be limited on that front. I'm not sure with the federal government. As far as my experience with consulting firms, I have many friends that are international students that work for consulting firms, and I don't, as far as I understand, not being an international student, I don't think that that is necessarily an issue. But that's just coming from someone who's not an international student and just having friends who are.
Hi, this is Joanna. Yeah, I don't feel like I'm able to actually provide any good advice on this, other than just to reinforce the whole idea of really reaching out to people and building a network, maybe with, let's say you are interested in an academic position and you know of someone who is international and is an academic now, just reaching out to them and asking similarly that you would in consulting or the public sector, just to talk to them for 30 minutes. How did you go through this process? What were some barriers? Maybe what are some steps you can already take to begin that process of trying to identify which hurdles you're going to have to overcome when searching for a job.
So Joanna, you were going in and out a little bit. Let me just reiterate what I think I heard you say, and just correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but you were saying that it may be useful to reach out to other international students that have acquired positions for advice about how that process goes. Is that?
Yes, sorry if I was coming in and out, but yes, that's exactly it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we just have a few minutes left. I think another question that many of us have is one that came through is, how do you market yourself to a position that's outside your field, but you have skills for that position? For instance, your background is in hydrologic modeling, and you're looking at consulting jobs in commercial industry. So I think that that's, a lot of us kind of in our PhDs get into very, very specific technical skills. How do you sort of broaden your skill set or marketing your skill set to a variety of positions?
Adam here. I'll take a first crack at that. I think that's a really interesting question, especially because there's so many job postings. You see things for like a data scientist, and you say, well, what the heck is a data scientist? Like, I'm a scientist and I work with data. I should be able to do that, right? Well, yes, you can. And I think there's maybe one tack you could take is being really generic about your skill set. Like, think about, can I put out a GitHub portfolio, or can I have some presence on my personal website that demonstrates not so much focus on the particular problems that I'm solving with my work, but more about the skill sets that I'm using to solve those problems, right? Focusing on, hey, I wrote this code to do this thing with this model, and it generated these outputs, and I made these really pretty graphics with this other software platform. That could be one way of sort of zooming out, focusing on your broader skill sets and placing emphasis there, and not drowning people out in the weeds of the field that you're already in. Like, don't bombard someone that wants to hire a graphic designer, maybe not a graphic designer, but a data scientist for marketing. Don't bombard them with the nuance of hydrologic model parameterization. They probably don't care, but they'd probably be pretty interested in seeing, how you approach and solve problems, because that's translatable.
Okay, so I think with that, we'll start to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and all of your super great questions for the panelists. And definitely thank you to all of our panelists for joining us and providing a wealth of resources, advice, and information about the pre-application phase. I certainly learned a lot, and I think we will work to compile the resources and tips from this call. So keep an eye on our Twitter account for kind of a summary of the information that was talked about here today. I did want to briefly mention that Dr. McDonnell has a book coming out soon called Navigating an Academic Career, a brief guide for PhD students, postdocs, and new faculty. Jeff, would you like to mention that book a little bit?
No, other than to make sure I send you a $20 check for that shameless self-promotion. Thanks very much. It'll be coming out in November, and it's co-published with Wiley and AGU. So hopefully it'll be at the AGU fall meeting if you attend, but you can see it online. Thank you.
Awesome. We will definitely keep an eye out for that. Also, Julia, if you could just switch to the next slide. I think CUAHSI had some updates for some other events that they have going on.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. This is Emily at CUAHSI. Thanks to HS3 and all of the wonderful panelists, and Anna and Julia for moderating this session this afternoon. This was really informative. And I just wanted to bring to your attention some additional events and deadlines that might be of interest to some of the people on the call. So if you're not familiar with CUAHSI, we have a lot going on. We host trainings and workshops. We host Cyberseminar series like the one that we're on now. And we also have a couple of fellowships open right now that provide funding for graduate students. So these are on the screen. Check these out. One of our programs, the Pathfinder Fellowship, provides travel funding to add another site for grad students to add another site to their research. So kind of depending on where you are in your program, this is something you might want to keep in mind. The application deadline is October 11th. So if you're interested, you can visit the CUAHSI website, or another great way to get information is by signing up for the CUAHSI newsletter. And so I will drop that link in the chat as well.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I think CUAHSI has so many wonderful opportunities for grad students and early career members. Definitely an excellent resource. So once again, a huge thanks to our panelists for their authentic and helpful advice today. We hope that you'll join us over the next 3 weeks for the rest of our cyber seminar series. Next week, we're going to be talking about the application phase itself. And then we have another session on post-application negotiations, and finally, the job transition. So we have an excellent lineup of panelists to share their experiences, and each webinar will be Thursdays, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So please join us again. Thanks.